I want to introduce our next speaker. She is the president of the California State Board of Education. We know she's been a champion for community schools herself and has been leading this fight for a while as well. We want to introduce State Board of Ed President Linda Darling-Hammond. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Karin. I'm so glad I caught this tail end of this panel. What a wonderful conversation. I've been tasked with sort of closing us out by giving us a little historical tour of where we've been and where we're going. And I just want to remind folks who are maybe not old enough to remember, some folks who are here, that in 2010, California was the worst funded and one of the most poorly performing states in the country. We were always below 40th in spending. We had the fewest teachers, administrators, counselors, nurses per pupil of any state. We had eliminated libraries and music and art and so many other things from so many schools. We were ranked between 45th and 50th in achievement on just about every measure. And John Merrow, who used to work for public broadcasting, did a documentary on California called From First to Worst. So a decade ago, that's where we were. Governor Brown and State Board President Michael Kirst and others brought in a new approach to everything in California, local control funding formula, which so many of you who are here at this conference fought for and helped to make happen. A new accountability approach, which again, folks here were very involved in developing. Our 8 state priorities, which really began to identify opportunities to learn as important alongside indicators of achievement, getting a rich, full curriculum, getting the adequate facilities and instructional materials and qualified teachers in every school, because things were so not only under-resourced, but inequitably resourced on top of that. Multiple indicators of achievement, moving from the CSTs, the old California Standards Tests, as the one measure, used substantially to punish schools which had too few resources, too many students with high needs and low scores, to a new set of assessments, but also college and career readiness, as well as seal of biliteracy, seal of civic engagement, which we're now trying to articulate at the state board, really saying our schools need to be much more for the aspirations of our people, bringing new investments in. And Governor Newsom, of course, has built on this legacy and taken it further. And we are poised, I believe, now to go from worst to first over this next several years. The total funding for K-12 education in this state has increased by double, from $64 billion in 2011 to $124 billion in 2021, over a decade, doubling in this period of time. And more than half of this has been added in just the last 4 years. And almost half in the last 3 years. In 2021, we finally broke the ceiling of $20,000 per pupil in our total per pupil funding. And the slope of improvement has been noted by people all across the country. Education Law Center puts out a publication every year about school finance across the states. And this year they noted that California had gone from 47th to 30th in the nation by 2019, before the big contributions to the education funding in the last 2 years, and has gone to become the 8th most progressive state in allocating those funds to the pupils who have the greatest needs. Some of you know Rucker Johnson at the University of California at Berkeley did a wonderful study of the effects of LCFF and found that it led to significant increases in high school graduation rates and student achievement, particularly with gains in math for students from low-income families. Graduation rates have improved significantly, from 79% in 2011-12 to 84% now in 2019-20. The gaps have narrowed between white and Asian students and African-American and Latinx students in graduation rates. Suspension and expulsion rates declined by more than a third as we got rid of zero tolerance policies, put in a variety of encouragements for restorative justice and restorative practices, which we just heard Lamont talking about in the case of his child in the school that he's currently in. And what's important about this is that not only have we begun down this path, there's always further to go and lots more for us to do. But during this period of time, in fact, schools in California became safer. School-based firearm incidents in the state, which were way above the national average in 2010, were far below the national average by 2015. They declined by more than 50%. Significant decreases in the rates of school-based fights, bullying, classroom disruptions. So those who believe that we need police in schools and hardening of schools to get safety are wrong, that the more we engage in restorative practices, the safer our schools become. Of course, the more attached students are, the more the community organizes itself to support and enable everyone in the school to achieve. So, of course, in these last couple of years, we've been challenged by the truly difficult times of the pandemic. Educators, community groups, parents, and students have been heroic in meeting the wide range of needs. We've gone a long way towards closing the digital divide, which at one point when we started the pandemic were at least a third of students who did not have connectivity and devices. We've now gotten to the point where at least 2/3 of that divide has been closed, and we've been zeroing in on it. And this year, we'll be making further strides to close that middle mile and then the last mile in terms of connectivity, with a strategy that over the long haul should make it sure that every child has, for their homework every night at home, the connectivity and the devices to be part of the technology age. We've been feeding children and families, and we now have, since last year, legislation to provide free school meals for all children in California. And we're now looking at ways to close the learning gaps caused by lost instructional time. And so many schools are taking this opportunity to say, how do we break out of the warehouse factory model school designs that we inherited from the 1920s? How do we break out of the punitive mindset that was part of the era of No Child Left Behind, in which the idea was that you would sort of flog schools into doing better by applying sanctions associated with test scores. And so we've got a sort of a rebirth beginning, and it is our job to carry this forward over the coming years to really get to the place where every school is a place where every student is supported, where families are welcomed, where we are really providing all of the resources in the right ways to enable success for all of our students. We, of course, started this last summer with 90% of California school districts offering summer school, and we now have funding to include summer school and before and after school in a long-term plan for how we approach education. We have this year had the challenges of opening schools in an ongoing pandemic, but we have been, for most of these last several months, the safest state in the nation with the adherence, and we thank all of the families and students and educators who've been adhering to the masking policies and getting vaccinated and engaging in all of the mitigation strategies. We have 12% of the nation's children, but less than 1% of the nation's school closings. And we've had very low transmission rates in schools that have been following these, admittedly onerous rules, but have been stepping up and stepping into the educational process and maintaining safety. We're about to go through another spike because the winter is coming, travel over the holidays. I just want to take this moment to urge all of you to be as safe as you possibly can so that we can come out the other end of this tunnel in the spring and be able to declare this pandemic defeated in California. So now we need to stay the course. We're in an era of school transformation. As you know, the last budget was extraordinary, and the investments focused on a better prepared teacher workforce. We now can say that if you will teach, we'll pay for your education for those who are willing to go into the fields and places where the needs are the greatest. We also have $250 million in the budget to bring national board certified teachers who are accomplished teachers, to give them a $25,000 stipend over 5 years in high poverty schools, to stabilize those schools, to be sure that beginning teachers get mentors, that students get the most expert instruction, that we as communities of practice can raise the bar for the schools that have experienced so much churn. Teacher residencies will be funded all across the state. We have, of course, the new emphasis on early care and education. TK is coming. We've got a lot of work to do to support that workforce in getting ready to expand the facilities. We've got some districts that have been out front, like Los Angeles, in getting TK expanded even before the state was able to do so. We're going to need to follow the lead of those who are really demonstrating what can be done. But if we can get all our earliest learners, and when Build Back Better is passed, we'll have resources for 3 and 4-year-olds coming into our schools. We've got to do that in a way that supports multilingualism, that supports their growth and development across social, emotional, cognitive, academic, and linguistic domains. We've got to bring families into that process in early literacy, and we need to make sure that that is a positive, joyful transition into schools that receive these young learners in positive and joyful ways. We've had a huge emphasis, as you know, as well, on learning recovery, and many, many districts have been putting in place the elements for that for all of their learners. And we've seen new tutoring programs emerging, new ways of organizing small group learning, extensions of the before and after school supports to also enable kids to be able to catch up and stay current in their learning. And we've seen so many places wrapping around with social and emotional learning and supports. And I just want to confirm what you all know, that social and emotional learning, the ways in which we learn to be in touch with our own feelings, to be able to share those in order to get resources and empathy, to develop interpersonal skills, to develop conflict resolution strategies that work for us. All of those things are not distractions from academic learning. They are the pathway to academic learning, because emotions and learning are completely connected. When we feel good about the environment we're in, when we feel trusting, when we feel that we are seen for who we are, not stigmatized, not exposed to stereotype threat, but encouraged, affirmed in our learning, when all of that positive relationship is in place, learning is accelerated. And so we have to be sure that that goes hand in glove with our efforts to support academic learning. And then, of course, there's the very substantial investment in mental health resources and in community schools. And I heard the conversation about those community schools as I came into this gathering. And I want to be sure that we understand that this is a vision, not just to add a health clinic or a few mental health services to some schools, but a vision for what all our schools should become. And one of the things I reflect on is an advancement project conference I was at a couple of years ago. This was before the pandemic. We were all there in person in Sacramento. And a young man stood up from JFK High School, John F. Kennedy High School, And he said, you know, we call JFK High School jail for kids. And he went on to describe an environment very much like many large, comprehensive warehouse factory model high schools that we inherited from that era 100 years ago, when the scientific managers were not thinking about designing schools for relationships, designing schools for supports, designing schools for equity. It was also in the era of the eugenics movement, where schools were being designed with different conveyor belts and tracks for students who were presumed to have different pathways into their futures. And you know, he described the ways in which it was a trauma-inducing experience to go to school. That cannot be a community school in California with these new investments that we're making, even if it adds a health clinic. A community school has to be a place where families are partners and welcomed, where schools are redesigned into small learning communities with advisory systems, with you know, the kinds of supports where teams of teachers share groups of students and get to know each other well, where relationship-centered designs are accompanied by restorative practices, by educative, social, and emotional supports, by inquiry-based, engaging learning that is often connected to what's going on in the community, and to the kinds of additional integrated services. And those need to be available to students when they need them. Unfortunately, our legal structure, our regulatory structure often creates services that you can only get after you jump through a lot of hoops, whether those are special education services that take, you know, a year and a half to get qualified for, or whether they are services that are for students or families for anything from housing to food to mental health. We've got to break down the bureaucratic barriers. We've got to surround all of our children with the services that they need when they need them. I'm thrilled that the Department of Education is approaching this in a way that is looking at all the things that community schools should be connected to, and a way to integrate around, so that we're really reshaping the way we do educational service provision in this state, as well as the way that we do education for our children. So I really appreciated Eduardo's story, Lamont's story about his child, as examples of what it is that we're striving for. It depends on all of us working together to celebrate our children, our diversity, our rich heritages, our determination to make the road while we are walking it, so that we have, at the end of the day, inclusive, safe, welcoming, socially just environments in every school, where educators, students, families thrive, collaborate, create, and excel.